Hello, my name is Daniel Crossman. This is my presentation on the most powerful pair of pants in all of Iceland. This is my abstract. We are going to be talking about the volcano Katla in southern Iceland. We're going to be talking about the geology that goes into Iceland, makes it so unique, some religious influences, and intense floodings that could lead to this legend of Katla. So Iceland is located in the northern Atlantic. It's kind of between Greenland and Scotland. It's on the edge of the Arctic Circle, and it is not heavily populated. In fact, it's about 3 inhabitants per square kilometer. 80% of the island is uninhabited, with most of the people living along the coast, which is not necessarily a good thing for our people there, and in response to our volcano Katla, which on the figure to the left you can see is right along the coast. Iceland is an island of traditions, and one example of this is its language, Icelandic, which has not changed really very much at all since the 10th century. In fact, modern readers can pick up and comprehend ancient Viking sagas because the language just really has not changed that much. So there have been some religious influences in Iceland, most notably paganism and Christianity. Paganism was strongly held in Iceland, influenced and brought by Vikings. Norse mythology they brought with them. That's Odin in the top right you see, and it was held pretty strongly in Iceland. But eventually, Christianity started to creep into Iceland. Well, this all kind of came to a head in the year 1000 AD, where the parliament had more or less divided into two factions, one paganistic and the other Christian. And they saw, for the health of their nation, for the sake of their nation, that they needed to choose a religious direction, otherwise they'd be torn apart. And so they elected one guy who was on the pagan side to go decide what the island would do. So the story goes that he finds a comfy spot, puts his hands behind his head, and he thinks. And he thinks all day, and he thinks all night, and he thinks and he thinks and he thinks, and he finally comes to a conclusion. So he calls a meeting, and he declares that all inhabitants should be baptized into Christianity, that Iceland would recognize Christianity. But if the inhabitants wanted to practice paganism, they could behind closed doors. So it was kind of a compromise. So eventually, temples were torn down, churches were built, monasteries were built. This particular monastery that you see here in the bottom left, we're going to come back to. That monastery was built in 1168, and it continued all the way up until the end of the 18th century, I believe. So even if you can't pronounce that, like me, remember it, because we're going to come back to it. Beside religious influences, Iceland is heavily influenced by geology. So, for those of you in my volcanology class with me, I apologize. There's a little bit of overlap between this presentation and that one, but hold on, I think you're going to like this. There are two main factors going into geology in Iceland, and that is a divergent boundary and a hotspot. And just as a quick overview, we have tectonic plates moving around on the surface of the Earth here. They're bumping into each other, and they're subducting under each other, and they're creating mountains and volcanoes and oceans and all kinds of stuff. Well, a divergent boundary is where two plates are moving away from each other. In Iceland's case, it's the North American plate and the Eurasian plate. And as they move apart, that decrease in pressure allows new magma to come up. And that's why divergent boundaries are called like constructive boundaries, because it's constructing new material. And so as they move apart, they create these ridges. And it's the mid-Atlantic ridge that runs through the Atlantic Ocean. And again, what makes Iceland unique is it actually goes up onto land in Iceland. You can walk between the tectonic plates, or you can choose to swim between them and reach out your hands and touch both plates at the same time, which I think is Iceland is a bucket list thing, I think. So we have the divergent boundary. We also have a hot spot. A hot spot is somewhere that's just magmatically really intense. It's abnormally high. And so examples are like Hawaii and Yellowstone, where those are unlike Iceland. Those are intraplate hotspots, so they're not near boundaries. They're in the middle of a tectonic plate, and that hotspot builds islands. And as the plate moves over it, it creeps one direction or another. It takes the overlying structure that the hotspot had made with it. So you can kind of track the movement of the plate. Iceland, however, it lives right over a divergent boundary and a hotspot. So it's kind of this double whammy of magnetism, where you're getting magnetism from the diverging boundaries and magnetism from the volcanic plume, or the magmatic plume. And so that makes Iceland geothermally just a powerhouse in the world. But additionally, so you have all this heat in Iceland, but additionally, you have lots of glaciers. It's in a northern latitude. 11% of Iceland is covered in glaciers, and in fact, there's enough ice there to cover the whole country 35 meters deep in ice. And if all that ice were to melt, it'd raise the global sea level by a centimeter. So Iceland is aptly named. There's a lot of ice there. And we are going to be focusing on the Mýrdalsjökull Glacier, which is in southern Iceland. It's the fourth largest glacier in Iceland. It's about 596 square kilometers. And beneath it is our volcano, Katla, actually the volcanic complex with fissures and vents and central vents and all kinds of stuff. So, what happens when we have a volcano sitting underneath a lot of ice? Well, I'm glad you asked. A yokup. And a yokup happens. A yokup is yokel is glacier and hlaup is burst, which is aptly named. These yokups create intense amount of flooding. So a caldera, which is like a volcanic bowl, starts to heat up, and if it's underlying a glacier, that means it's going to start heating the overlying ice, and that ice is going to turn to water, and it's going to fill that glacial, or it's going to fill that caldera, and more water is going to be melted, or more ice is going to be melted, and that water is going to be growing and growing and growing, and eventually we have this subglacial lake. Well, that lake is going to continue to grow, but we have a really, 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 really big glacier capping off our caldera, capping off this whole a lot of the volcanic system. Well, that pressure is building and building and building, and something eventually has to give. And when something gives, whether from the ice dam or from the caldera itself, we get intense amount of flooding coming out incredible rates. A good example is the Grimsvatn Jökull in 1996. It's not the video here, but the Grimsvatn Jökull peaked at 50,000 cubic feet per second, making it briefly the second largest river in the world. It took out bridges. It took out a whole bridge, a part of another bridge. It took out kilometers and kilometers of roads. It completely changed. These things change the landscape. It changes the terrain. When they're done, there's huge glaciers weighing tons and tons and tons of pounds dotting the landscape. There you can see standing waves. The Grimsvatn Jökull created standing waves between 3 and 4 meters high. I mean, they're incredible. But believe it or not, this is not actually the largest Jökull. The Katla volcano in 1918 produced a heck of a Jökull. Now, Katla, we're finally at our volcano here. Katla is a caldera, and it has not officially erupted since 1918. Now, we've had smaller geothermal events that have led to Jökulls, but the last time it officially erupted was 1918. And when it erupted, it created a Jökull that came in at about 10,600,000 cubic feet per second, which is like, how do you quantify that? That's insane. In my other presentation, I kind of compared it to insane whitewater rafting. Like I've been told that crazy, crazy death-defying whitewater kayaking happens at 6,000 CFS. So if you see a video and think, holy cow, how did they even do that? This is at 10 million. This is over 10 million CFS. It brought ash and volcanic material and all kinds of stuff. It deposited 70 billion square feet of sediment, which is about the volume of Mount Everest. I mean, it extended Iceland's land. These completely changed the terrain, the landscape. They're incredibly powerful. And yet, the eruption of 1918 is still not the biggest one. In 1755, Katla erupted, and it was believed that it peaked. It could be up to 14 million CFS. 14 million CFS. That is the discharge rate of the average discharge rate of the Amazon, the Mississippi, the Nile, and the Yangtze River all combined. Incredible power built up behind these. In the bottom right, you can see a hazard map of the Katla volcano. I apologize, you can't really see it, but like Vic establishment is right here. The monastery that we're going to talk about in a little bit is believed to be right in this area. Incredible power. So you take all of that, you put it together, you take geology and you take volcanism and you take glaciers and you take religion and you mash it together, a bunch of people, and you get stories. So this is the legend of Katla. And it goes that a long time ago, at that monastery that I mentioned earlier, there was an abbot, and there was somebody named Katla. And Katla was this abbot's housekeeper. Well, Katla was a mean-tempered old hag. And beyond that, they were pretty sure that she had some magical powers, that she might be a sorceress. And one piece of evidence that led towards that was that she had a magical pair of pants. That whenever you put these pants on, you could run really fast for as long as you want and not get tired. Pretty handy, right? So one day, Katla and the abbot were going to go out and then return that evening. Well, Katla, you don't want to get on her bad side. And unfortunately, the abbot's shepherd, Barty, was on Katla's bad side. And so Katla came up to Barty and she said, you better have all of those sheep rounded up and put back in the pen by the time we get back, or else. And then she took off. Well, poor Barty, he knew there was no way he was going to get all these sheep in the pen by the time that they returned. So he figured what he would do is he would sneak and he would steal Katla's pants and use them to round up the sheep. So he did just that. And he zipped around and he got all the sheep. He got them in the pen. He put the pants away before they returned. And he thought he was in the clear. Well, Katla came back and she saw all the sheep in the pen and she knew there's no way he could have done this. Something's up. Well, she got really angry because she figured Barty used my magical pants. And so she logically found Barty and drowned him. Okay? And depending on the story that you read, it's either acid that she drowned him in or a big vat of whey at the entrance to the monastery. Well, she hid the body in the vat. And as summer was approaching, people were like, man, where's Barty? We haven't seen him in forever. And she knew that that level of whey was going down and eventually her secret would be known. So fearing retribution, she put on the pants. She raced north. She went up the mountain. She went up the glacier, and she flung herself in a canyon, now known as Katla Canyon. Soon after, a large flood came roaring down the mountain and completely inundated the entire south coast. So it's believed whenever that flooding occurs from Katla, that nasty old hag is the reason behind it all. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Iceland. I sure enjoyed researching about it. It's an incredible country with rich history and really cool geology. So it was a pleasure being in class with all of you. I hope you have a great summer, and thank you for listening to my presentation. Here are my references, and if you have any questions, let me know.